ride with me to the other clans and we will defeat the sky people.
You can't start the car. Johnny has the keys.
Hello, and welcome out there in podcast and, of course, YouTube land. You have reached Johnny Has the Keys, a podcast and YouTube channel where we actually take horror movies, science fiction, talk about key references, hence our very clever title, in those particular movies or films, and then things that they in turn have influenced since their creation. If you are joining us for the first time, great. Glad to have you here and hope that you would maybe subscribe down there on YouTube and or ring the bell and or give us a little review, even if it's a three-word kind of loved it sort of thing, whatever, especially on Apple. That, of course, helps us because it gets more people involved. My name is David. I've been doing this for a while now with my co-host, Tim. Tim, what's up? What you been doing?
Oh, my gosh. What have I been doing?
I don't know.
Well, we normally talk about genre week, and I actually dove into a movie that I've been wanting to see for a while and just never got around to. It is on Shudder, of course. My go-to platform of choice. It is a little movie directed by a woman named Claudia Colbert, I believe is her name. It's called She Will. I wanted to see this movie. I mentioned it in A Coming to Get You a while back because it's produced by Dario Argento and it looked really cool to me. It's about a woman that goes with her assistant. She's an actress that goes with her assistant to this I guess you call it a vacation type spot in Edinburgh, Scotland, where she is recuperating from a double mastectomy. And it happens to be a spot that historically used to burn witches. So there's this sort of, I don't know if it's a possession so much as a haunting of witches and witchcraft. Anyway, I'm not going to get too much into the plot. It has Alice Creed in it. And it has Malcolm McDowell in it, and it has Rupert Everett. It just had the makings of what looked like a really good film to me, and I didn't like it.
It had the makings, but it just didn't bake right.
Well, I can tell you why. You know me. I like artsy, atmospheric movies. I have a fondness for movies. The Witch is a prime example. It's one of those movies that's artsy and atmospheric, but it still works and it's scary and it's good. This movie reminded me of a movie that I watched a season or so back that I told you about that pissed me off, called Saint Maud.
Okay.
It's so slow and so artsy that it's pretentious and it's boring and it's not scary at all. So I would put this more in the category of Saint Maud. Sorry for you folks out there that were looking was something a little better. You know, I was too. I really had hopes for this movie, and I was kind of let down by it. So,
well, that's bad or terrible. Or
that was my genre week. Very lukewarm.
Yeah, very, very lukewarm. Mine was too, ironically. I finally delved into Wheel of Time, something that I have intentionally been putting off for months and months, almost a year now, actually. A novel series by Robert Jordan, which is phenomenal and incredible, and I've loved, even though I've never finished it because it's like 15 freaking books. But the first 7 books are incredible and great world building and really good. I mean, to rival Tolkien, really, seriously, it's very good stuff.
You told me there were like a couple of books that you could combine.
5 and 6, you can basically say that's just basically one long story that you could have done in half a book. But so he did kind of pad that one out a little bit, both of those. And I don't know the final ending, so I can't really speak to that, but not that this series even comes close to that. So far, I'm only halfway through the series, and I'm actually thinking about stopping because it's just, they've taken such liberties with it that they kind of lost the source material a little bit, which is sad because, again, to me, the source material is really genius and really cool. It's a fantasy world, but it's Tolkien meets Dune meets all kinds of this fantasy element storytelling with some compelling characters and some great twists and a lot of dark under edge to it. Earlier we were talking about Neil Gaiman and the fact that he's even inducted into the horror thing, a Hall of Fame or whatever, but he writes graphic novels,
he's been in the Horror Writers Association.
But
at the time he was doing like Sandman as graphic novels, and then he writes like fantasy or dark fantasy with American gods and stuff. So it's not really horror, but yeah, he does fit into the horror category.
And that's kind of what this is. Robert Jordan probably would have too, or should have been, just because the underlying threat of this is very similar to like Harry Potter. It's that he who shall not be named, Voldemort, Death Eaters kind of thing, except in this one, they're called the Forsaken. And they are essentially 12 demons that are slowly being released into the world, sort of thing. They've been imprisoned for 1,000 years, and now they're coming back. And it's such a huge mythos world that he's built in these novels, and they've truncated all down in the television series. I mean, I know you have to because you are, limited. You're telling a story in an hour, each episode, yada yada, sort of thing. But the changes that they've made, I don't agree with. And if you're a fan of Wheel of Time out there, I would love to talk to you about it and see what you think of this interpretation, because people have tried to do these series of books for years since he first started publishing them. And there was one, it got held up in royalty hell forever. And these other things happened with licensing where this company had bought it, and their license was running out. So literally they put an hour-long movie, they called it, together and published it online before the midnight deadline, literally, so they could keep the rights for another 4 years. It was crazy, silly. But it has a great cast. It has some really good cast to it.
Let me ask you this. Are they sticking to the novel by novel, or are they trying to cram too much into it at once? Like Dark Tower.
They're stretching it out, it seems to me. It's like the first 2 episodes are really the first book, which is fine, but there's details in that first book that they don't even touch on in the first 2 episodes. So it's like I'm worried. Have you just cut that element and you're just not going to deal with it at all, or what are you going to do? And then other things that they've changed and adjusted. And I don't want to sound like I'm, what do they call, anti-woke or whatever, or against this whole diversity movement, but they have diversified so much that it's not the characters that are written in the book, if that makes sense. Some of it I know was due to probably budget and constraint. There's one race of characters, and if you consider, because this is a fantasy world, but this race is similar to, I don't know, like an ogre or a giant. They're like 7 to 8 feet tall, but they're very passive, quiet, almost like in Tolkien speak, picture a giant dwarf. That's kind of how they're described. Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to catch it with my sphere. No, but they're kind of like a giant dwarf, a character that reads all the time, very gentle, communes with nature, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. The guy they cast is obviously very human looking. He's only about 6 feet tall. He has none of the characteristics that are described in the character, both visually and or intellectually. And I'm like, why did you make this change? Was it just because you couldn't do the effects, or what?
That doesn't make much sense.
The name of the first novel is The Dragon Reborn. So you kind of know the dragon's coming back. He's going to be reborn, kind of goes with it. The whole purpose of the book is we're hunting for who may be this dragon. We don't know who it is. Although in the novel, you're taking it from literally one person's point of view for most of the novel. So you're pretty sure who the dragon is going to be. He's not revealed until the second book, but you're pretty sure who it's going to be. In this, they treat the entire first 2 episodes like we don't know. Could be this guy, or this guy. Except, and that's kind of in the book. They do a little bit too. It could be either of those 3, but
so there's a mystery element.
But we know it's the one guy. I mean, you just know from reading the novel because it's almost the entire novel taken from his point of view. So more than likely, he's going to end up being the Dragon Reborn. Okay. And spoiler alert, he is. But in the television series, it's not just those 3. It's these 2 girls and this other guy, and any of them could be the Dragon Reborn. And you don't need that. You don't. The whole point of the series is, I told you about the Forsaken, the darkness, but the other big underlying conceit to the whole thing, because the symbol you always see is like that yin yang symbol. Yeah. That you see for the Wheel of Time.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Or the serpent that coils around and eats its own tail, kind of thing. That circle, the wheel always rolls, kind of thing, and everything balances and yada yada. There's all this thing to it, and it's very, very separatist, I guess is a good way of saying it, from feminine and masculine. And I think I've talked about this on the podcast before.
It sounds familiar.
They each have this magical ability. But what happens is when the men use the magical ability, it usually drives them insane.
Yeah, you did tell me this.
So the big deal is these women, it's a matriarchy, and they're basically in control of the world right now. Mm-hmm. And they go around and hunt these men and who might have channeling or the power, and they kill them or geld them, take the power away from them. So they can't use it because they don't want them to go crazy and start hurting people or destroy the world or whatever, yada, yada. So this dichotomy of male, female, very, very important. Yet in this whole story, with what they've done with casting and cross-gender casting and some of the references they're making and everything else, is that's kind of amorphous and very diverse and very progressive, but it doesn't work for this story because this story is extremely, one doesn't go, you can't flip them. Does that make sense?
Right. Kind of. It was written at a time too. Yeah. A long time ago as well.
Correct. It was written decades ago. And it's also, that was the time frame, but that's also just a major conceit of the story. And so long rambling short, no, I was dissatisfied with this. And I'm hoping that maybe by the end of this season, they'll fix it. I think they have been renewed for a second season.
So it sounds to me like they're trying to bring a classic to fruition, but they want to change it for modern audiences.
Yes.
And it's not really... it's kind of a disservice to the actual novel.
Correct.
Yeah. Correct. I see what you're saying. That
so
sucks.
So far it feels like I'm watching the last season of Game of Thrones where nothing makes sense and doesn't work anymore, and you've just thrown the source material out and said I'm just going to do whatever, kind of thing. So
wow,
sadly true. But so very, very disappointing, and the big scary element of it is gone. There's all these monsters and Trollocs and weird creatures and a lot of that's not in it. And I'm going, where's my darkness? Where's my scary things?
So we've both had lackluster genre weeks.
Yeah.
We're going to have a better one next time.
Building up to a double feature episode. I mean, come on.
It is a double feature episode. And we are going back. It has nothing to do with what we've talked about. No. So I'm not even going to try to segue. No. But we are going back to my favorite place to visit as far as comfort food, and that is Universal horror movies. And we're going to speak about the classic Universal monster, the Mummy.
The Mummy.
The Mummy.
Yes.
We have covered one Mummy movie on this podcast. Do you remember what it was?
We covered a Mummy movie?
Yes. And it was better than either one of these. I mean, I still like these, but to me, the one that we've covered is much better.
Which one?
We did Bubba Hotep.
Oh, Bubba Hotep. Yeah.
Which is a Joe Lansdale story. So I'm kind of biased there.
Oh, but it's great.
It is.
So
it's a
good.
great mummy story because it also has Elvis in it.
Yeah.
Played by Bruce Campbell.
Bruce Campbell, of course. So can't go wrong.
But with this one, we're going to go back to 1932 with the original Karloff mummy movie. And then we're going to jump a little ahead to 1959 with the Hammer remake with Christopher Lee.
Yeah.
I am going to kind of move into the summary of I think we should probably keep them a little separate because my notes are separate, so it'll be easier for me that way. But I'll give a brief synopsis really quick of the 1932 version. In 1921, a field expedition in Egypt discovers the mummy of ancient Egyptian prince Imhotep, who was condemned and buried alive for sacrilege. Also found in the tomb is the scroll of Thoth, which can bring the dead back to life. One night, a young member of the expedition reads the scroll aloud and goes insane, realizing that he has brought Imhotep back to life. 10 years later, don't know what happened in those 10 years. Disguised as a modern Egyptian, the mummy attempts to reunite with his lost love, an ancient princess who has been reincarnated into a beautiful young woman. So this movie takes place in two times, 1921 and 1932, which is the release date of the movie, coincidentally, 1932. I have not seen this movie in a very long time. It's one of those I would watch late at night on like Shock Theater or whatever. Do you have any rememberings of this movie?
I have no rememberings of like first seeing it or anything like that. I did. I'm sure I watched it on Shock Theater. I'm sure I watched both of these actually on Shock Theater, which was my Saturday, afternoon, horror or science fiction binge watching sort of thing. I can say going into this that I remember them being better than they are. And I'm wondering if I'm confusing them with other mummy movies. And I thought that, so I did some research looking back and went, no, I'm really not, because the closest would probably be Mummy's Hand. I remembered I liked parts of that one because literally his hand was wrapped across him and he could not move it. He only used
his foot
one hand. Yeah, he was more, I guess, scary to me, menacing when he walked.
I actually watched that movie too.
Oh, okay.
And I was curious about it because it's one my mother always loved because she said her brothers used to scare her with dragging their foot after she saw that movie. And they did some really cool effects with that movie. They actually hand painted frames in that movie to black out his eyes and mouth in close-ups. So it looked like it was empty. His head, it was really freaky looking for that kind of effect back in the day. Anyway, that movie, we won't go into it too much. It was made on the cheap 10 years later. I swear it's supposed to be in the desert, but they're running around in the hills of California and there's like grass and trees and the temple looks Mexican, but then they cut and they're like in Egyptian streets and stuff. It is so, it really cracked me up when I watched it. So enough about it. This movie was unique in that the mummy is only in two scenes because when Karloff comes back 10 years later, he's out of the bandages and he just has really wrinkly skin.
Yeah. Yeah. And I did some production research.
Sure.
And some of the things I really liked about it was, Carl Laemmle produced The Mummy in 1932. This came out the year after Frankenstein, which he had also produced. Frankenstein was a huge hit. So he was going, wow, I need something else. I need something new. I need something that'll work. So he actually went to the writer, Balderston, who had done the plays for Dracula and Frankenstein, had written play versions of those stories and said, do you got anything? I got to have another hit. I got to have another, monster movie kind of thing. He was actually working on a story based on a guy, and I'll probably pronounce it wrong, but Cagliostro. And Cagliostro was like a magician and an occultist and supposedly had done some ritual that kept him alive for 1,000 years. And so Balderston was kind of working on him as an idea, and that kind of layered into the Egyptian story. And he was thinking, mummies, great, that kind of thing. And plus the fact that he was playing up the Tutankhamun story, which was huge, and the curse of Tutankhamun and everything else.
Well, yeah, it was the discovery or the excavation of Tutankhamun was what, 10 years earlier? It was recent.
And Balderston was a journalist who was actually there when they opened the tomb. He actually covered the Tutankhamun, entire thing for the world. So he had some, major insight into it, sort of thing. But yeah, I think, but anyway, so they come up with the idea, they come up with the script. It's rushed because they want to get it out because of the popularity of Frankenstein and Dracula before that. So they want to do something great. They do all this makeup testing, and they did all the makeup testing with Jack Pierce, who's the same guy who did all of the makeup,
the classic monsters,
for all of Universal. He was their makeup guy. And the first makeup application took over 8 hours on Karloff. And it was everything from glue to tissue to latex to clay, all of this stuff. And taking it off took almost 3 hours. It was horrible. He really did not like it. And he, we've talked before, like, when Robert Englund was talking about how his skin was starting to get affected after Freddy Krueger, after like the third movie and all that. And that was with modern stuff. Imagine this back then when they're literally caking glue on your face, and then you're having to tear it off or use some form of antiseptic or something to get it off your face.
Spirit gum remover.
Which they didn't have at the time.
No, it would probably turpentine or something.
But again, Jack Pierce was trying to recreate that whole Lon Chaney era of the silence of, how do we alter the face and makeup that makes this all scary and creepy. Anyway, so it's theorized. None of this was ever stated anywhere, but a couple of people online are theorizing that that's one of the reasons why the script was altered, and you don't see Karloff in the full makeup again after that first opening sequence.
Right. And they were making up his whole body, and you don't even see him from the waist down.
Right. Yeah. Right. I do think it's a problem. It's a big problem in the fact that it's called The Mummy, and he's in the first scene. The rest of the time, he's really not a mummy. He's not. Just he talks and he has interactions and everything else. He's not.
I find it interesting that you brought up the writer of the plays and Dracula in particular, because basically this is kind of a rehash of the Dracula story.
Oh, it is. I've got there's 8 keys from Dracula just in this.
Yeah, easily. and they even use the same freaking music. It's Swan Lake.
It's Swan Lake.
All they did was say, Karloff did well, and Bela Lugosi did well in 31. Let's just kind of rip off Lugosi's movie a little bit, would use the same music and just change the script around a bit and set it in Egypt.
Yep. This was Carl Freund's directorial debut. He had been a production designer and coordinator and done a bunch of other stuff like that, but this was his directorial debut. And
coincidentally, before you go on, he was also the cinematographer on Dracula.
Yep. That's one of the reasons why Limley wanted him, sort of thing. However, what I did hear was he was extremely misogynistic, was very power hungry, and did not get along with Zita Johann at all, who was the lead actress. So much so that he ended up cutting huge portions out of the movie that they had shot with her that I think would have actually added to the story. Because evidently in the original screenplay and what they shot, Imhotep and Anaksunamun, which they call her something different in this. That's not, they call her, I don't have it in front of my notes real quick.
Who's Zeta's character?
Yeah.
It's Helen Grosvenor.
Right, but she's supposedly the reincarnation.
of the one that Karloff was in love with back in time. Yeah, I can't remember.
Anaxonomen, and I think they call her Anxonomen in this. The best pronunciation of that literally is in the Frasier remake, which is Anaxonomun, which is her real name or should be her name. Anyway, but they give her this, supposedly she has been recreated throughout history. And they filmed scenes of like her in medieval England and then her in the Renaissance, and everything else. So her spirit has come back several times. And this
would have given
time.
her a stronger part too.
Correct. Yeah. But because he didn't like her, and she didn't like him, he cut her out. And that's why also parts of this, especially in that last second half, feel real truncated and weird, and like there's a scene missing, and suddenly we're over here, and now we've got an Isis necklace that never came from anywhere. And
well, and I actually watched a documentary on the film, and there was a couple of guys, I can't remember, maybe David Scow may have been one of them, that actually met Zeta before she died. And she said she felt like she was being used as a scapegoat because he felt like the movie was going to tank and he needed a reason for it.
Could have been.
So,
yeah, she, two things, and then we'll get off that. But
sure.
They said that the treatment of her was so bad, and the crew knew it, everybody knew it, that was one of the reasons that Boris Karloff became one of the founding members of the Screen Actors Guild, was to protect actors and the way they're treated and the way directors can. Yes, that was a huge deal that came out of this. He's one of the founding members. I never knew he was a founding member.
I didn't either.
But he was one of the founding members of the Screen Actors Guild, and it was because of the treatment on this film. It was filmed in only 3 weeks, which means some of their days were like 18-hour days.
I'm sure.
So, and that was with everybody in the crew and shooting all the flashback mummy scenes and all of that. And plus him in makeup, because if it's an 18-hour day, he is spending at least 6 of it getting in and out of makeup, in addition to the 18 hours you're filming.
Yeah.
And having to be there the next day, kind of thing. So he said, because of his treatment, because of her treatment, he wanted something that would help defend the actors. So that's why I came up with
it. That's kind of like a rainbow at the end of the storm.
Yeah. And Zeta said that this is one of the major reasons why she went back to theater, because she was a big theater actress. She went back and really didn't return to Hollywood.
Well, in all honesty, I played devil's advocate a little bit with her because she had a bad reputation from 2 other studios. So I think there was a little bit of
back and forth. Yeah.
And you mentioned Balderson and you mentioned Pierce.
Yeah.
The only other thing I had about Karl Freund is that he went on to be a very prolific television director with I Love Lucy. And I thought that was kind of interesting that he went on. I guess Lucy and Desi really liked him, and
he really enjoyed the 3-camera setup, from what I read, because Desi, I Love Lucy created the standard 3-camera setup that became a Hollywood staple.
And I think some of that may have been attributed to him as well. Yeah.
He helped design that so they could always have the third, camera.
Okay.
Sort of
yeah.
Thing. Yep.
All right. As far as cast, we mentioned Boris Karloff's in it. Boris, I just love Boris Karloff. He was virtually unknown, the year before Frankenstein came out. And then all of a sudden he created such a sensation that they literally use his name to advertise this movie.
Of course.
Karloff is the mummy. So no surprise there. You mentioned Zita and the problems she had with Freund, but I read that she also had problems with MGM and RKO before she came to Universal. So and I looked at her resume, and she didn't do a lot after this. She may have had a handful of other films, and then she kind of retired. So I don't know if she got blacklisted, maybe. I don't know that Freund had everything to do with it. I'll just leave it at that. He did do a scene with her and lions that kind of jeopardized her.
Yep.
Which may also play into the fact of Karloff and the whole Screen Actors Guild thing that you mentioned. I don't really have anything else on the cast because the movie is so old. And as far as awards, everything is posthumous because it's just awards for DVDs, like Universal DVD reissues and that kind of thing. It was not on the 1001 movies you must see before you die because it is not Frankenstein. It is not that good. So there's that. I may have a little trivia. Do you have anything before we move on to keys with this one, or do you want to do keys together with both of them?
A little, no, we can just separate them.
Okay.
A little trivia I have is his name. This is, from what I've researched, this is the only time they actually use Imhotep as, or Imhotep is the pronunciation, supposedly in Egyptian, of him, which begs the question, how do you know how somebody pronounces something in an ancient language that's dead for 2,000 years?
That was originally written in hieroglyphics.
Yeah. So how's that pronunciation work for you? Anyway,
don't
but Imhotep was an actual person. He was an actual Egyptian. He was the architect of the Step Pyramid. So one of the first pyramids ever. He also became chancellor to Pharaoh Djoser. And he developed kind of a cult following. It was like 1,000 years after his death, and suddenly they're getting hieroglyphics that say you have to do this ritual, and you do this ritual in the way Imhotep did, or you do this ritual in honor of Imhotep. And they're going, really? This guy who was just an architect back in the day, and now he's suddenly mentioned in all these prayer rituals? And it grew and grew. So there was even a cult of Imhotep. So much so that when Joe and I were writing Nosferatu, the character, we ended up making him Imhotep. He's our original vampire from years and years ago.
Oh, interesting.
And I'm sure he's probably mentioned in Anne Rice when she goes into, that history.
I'm pretty sure he is. Do you know what Imhotep means?
Something about life.
It means I come in peace.
Oh, come in peace. Yeah.
So I thought that was interesting.
Which is, ironic and could have been played up in this story, that was his original name. And yet he committed the sacrilege and now had to have the, whatever they call it, the something death, the undying death, or whatever they sentence him to.
And you mentioned that Imhotep, I have problems saying that. This was really the only movie they used that name in. All the other movies feature a mummy named Karis.
Yeah, with a K.
Yeah, including the other one that we're covering today, and including the mummy's hand, which also went back and used some footage from this movie as well. I'm telling you, the mummy's hand is a really cheap movie.
I'm pretty sure the Fraser one uses Imhotep as well, because they go back to the original name and the original name for her, because she's Anaxunamun in the Brandon Fraser series trilogy. Okay,
that would make sense. That's when we've jumped ahead to more modern cinema. Yeah, I see that.
Yeah.
The only other thing I have is that
were there any scenes you liked?
Oh, we didn't do scenes. That's right. I love the flashback scenes in both movies. Where
I do too. I think they're better in this one.
I think it's because it's the most horrific thing in the story, and that's why I gravitate to it.
I agree. I think my two favorite scenes in this are the scary scenes. I love the opening and the way they do that, because they show him in the sarcophagus when they open it, but then when he's reading the scroll of Thoth, you just pan over and it's empty, and then you pan back and you just see the hand come up over the scroll, and then he screams, and it's great and scary and worth it.
It is very scary.
And I like the scene that's in the picture behind you when they actually condemn him to the nameless death, and they're burying him alive.
Right.
And that's terrifying. And it shows in Karloff's eyes. It's a great scene.
It's very silent film-y too, because it's a flashback and done without sound in places, isn't it? I think.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's because it's narrated. It's narrated over.
Exactly.
And right after that, they actually show them killing all of the slaves and killing the guards. And people are getting stabbed. And I'm going, this is 1932? And they're showing this?
I think it was shortly before the ratings thing came about.
Yeah, it's before the Hayes Commission.
Right.
So, yeah, it's definitely, but they got away with, I'm sure that was probably terrifying in 32 to see this guy buried alive and then see these people with spears stabbed through them and everything.
Right.
Right.
So as far as scenes, those are the two scenes really that stick out to me. One is because it has the mummy in it, and there's only two scenes with the mummy, and then when they're making the mummy, and that premature burial aspect that's just terrifying. Keys?
Dracula's all over this. I mean, there are so many keys, even down to, so we have Van Helsing, which is the Egyptian scholar. We have Jonathan Harker, which is her, vastly fast-paced relationship lover kind of thing. Instead of the asylum, we're using the museum. Instead of a cross, we have the necklace of Isis. It just keeps going. It is so inspired by Dracula, trying to fit in the formula. Even down to the prologue takes place, and we lose our hero sort of thing, even though he comes back to be Van Helsing later on. But it's that kind of thing. And then later we're back in London, and he comes back into the story.
Right. Well, did you mention that it's the same actor that played Van Helsing?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Because he also was in Frankenstein. He was a doctor, and he did the prologue in Frankenstein. His name is Edward von Sloan.
Okay. Yeah.
And,
I did not
he
know
plays
that,
Dr.
actually.
Muller in this. Yeah. It's the exact same actor.
Perfect. I do like the scene behind you. You have the shot with Karloff as Arat Bey, whatever they called him, and when he could speak. And they did that great effect with the shadow on his eyes, and the light came down and just his eyes kind of lit up.
Yeah.
So it was a great cinematography idea, but it's very similar to that whole light across the eyes from
With
Dracula.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another key.
Yeah, very much so. I love how Universal was trying to force these things. We need more monsters.
And I've never looked at it this way before. It's what I love about the podcast is doing Dracula and then Frankenstein and now the Mummy going into the creature. You can see how they suddenly got, these characters need to be sympathetic. We care more about the creatures than we do about the creators.
Yeah.
And this one they tried, but they didn't get there, I don't think, because they just having him Karloff, I just don't think they did it screenplay wise. It was no offense to Karloff at all. I think it was just the story didn't sympathize him enough.
Right.
And the ending made it look like, really terrible kind of thing.
It's funny that you say that you touched on this, because I was going to touch on it a little bit later, but it's like they got the formula right with Frankenstein. Dracula's just kind of an anachronism. It's to the side. They didn't really get it right with this one. And then when they get it right in the future, it's always 10 years later. Like nothing in the 30s, but jump to the 40s and they did the Wolfman and it's great. Then jump to the 50s and they did Creature from the Black Lagoon and it's great.
Yes.
So it's like it takes them 10 years to go, wait a minute. Maybe we could do it this way.
Maybe we shouldn't rush this, and like do one a year and instead come up with a way to tell the story better. Yes, I totally agree with that.
Because the other two great movies are Wolfman and Creature. I wouldn't consider Invisible Man in there either. And that was 30s.
But I do think what we're talking about are key elements. This was universal learning that, these are what we need to have to make this work going forward. And we need to take this element, and then refine these other three or whatever sort of thing. So yeah, definite keys coming from this, even on down to, if we're talking keys from 32, we have to go to, 99 when the Brandon Fraser trilogy, the reboot essentially came.
Right.
And all of them are huge referential back to this. And then even the disastrous, cruise thing, which was terrible and destroyed the hope of a dark universe sort of thing.
Right.
But those were all keys that came from this. I've got Phantom of the Opera. I think that's a key to this and from this, because it's I've crossed oceans of time for you. I have, you are my love. He's the older guy seducing the younger woman because she's his true love sort of thing. That's a very Eric Phantom of the Opera, which they later do in Phantom of the Opera at Universal.
I was going to say that one actually came a decade earlier in the 20s, if you want to count the silent version.
Right. But then Universal did it, and Hammer did it.
Mm-hmm.
So they copied that as well. I mean, they use those keys as well for that.
Yeah.
I've got I did the face close up, which was one of my keys. I did one of the trivia things I have that's from this one is this is the first of these universals that's not based on a novel, because Dracula was and Frankenstein was.
Yes, I did. I read that as well. That makes perfect sense.
So yeah,
it's the first classic, or the first universal horror classic that's not based on a novel, because even Phantom is based on a novel.
Correct. Yep.
Yeah, for sure. I had, when you mentioned all the Dracula references, I'm going to go back to what I said earlier, and that's Tchaikovsky. It's the same damn music.
Swan Lake. Yep.
So the soundtrack.
I think it could work better here if it had been done right. It could have worked better for this than Dracula, I think.
Another one of the things that we touched upon that I consider a big key of this movie is King Tut and the whole King Tut phenomenon that happened in, I guess it was the 20s.
Yes. Yeah. 21.
Yeah. They found it. There's rumor of a curse on the tomb if you just desecrate it. And basically a lot of that worked into the script of this film. And the wrath of the mummy, so to speak.
Yeah, interesting, bit of trivia for those of you out there watching and listening. One of the people who was cursed by that supposedly was Carnarvon, Lord Carnarvon. His castle in England is where they filmed Downton Abbey. That's That's his family estate. That's Carnarvon's estate, and his descendants still live there in the castle.
Well, that's very cool.
Yeah, that's kind of just a offshoot trivia sort of thing. But yeah, I've always been curious, because I think you touched on something there with the key to this, because that is the story, especially of the 59 version, is you desecrated this tomb years and years ago. So now we're going to kill off the people that originally desecrated and went into the tomb, which is the curse of Tut. What happened was, Carnarvon and the two other aides that he had, and one other person, I think it was 4 altogether, ended up having mysterious deaths that everyone says was because of the tomb, the curse
of King Tut in the 19th or 20th century. Yeah,
that's a great key. Yeah.
And then I also, I have a couple more keys. One is, of course, Anne Rice. Her novel, The Mummy, Ramses of the Damned, to me is the best mummy story out there. And that's the one that these people should be making.
Okay. I've never read it.
It's great. Basically, she just flips the vampire legend. And these are creatures that thrive on the sun. The sun is what keeps them immortal.
Okay.
And it deals with Cleopatra coming back, and she is like a bitch. I mean, she is horrible. She is the villain of the novel.
Okay.
So if you ever have a chance, I highly recommend that. Now, her son and her wrote a sequel to it. I have not read because I'm scared to read it. Because I like the original so much. I'm really scared, but it's called Ramses the Damned.
Okay.
And I would highly recommend that novel. I've read it twice.
I will have to look that one up then.
Yeah. And then lastly, I have a personal story that I have told on this podcast before, and I will rehash it a bit because it got I'm not sure what the word is I'm looking for. It got disproved. It's not true, I guess.
Okay.
I went to a horror convention. I believe it was in Nashville in the 90s. And I was sitting, I believe, listening to Richard Matheson give a speech, and there was hardly anybody there. I felt really bad for him. And I happened to be sitting in the audience next to this rather extravagant gentleman. At the time, I would have kind of described him as like Salvador Dali. He didn't have a handlebar mustache or was that weird, but he was dressed. He was dressed for the occasion. The rest of us are in jeans and T-shirts, and this guy's got like a jacket on and nice shoes and slacks. And I'm sitting next to him, and he's got a cane, and he's got his hands on the cane. And I just said, "That is an awesome ring you have there." And he said, "Thank you. Boris gave me that. It's from The Mummy." And I was like, "What?" And it was Forrest Ackerman. who I was sitting next to. And Forrest Ackerman, of course, went on. This was after the fact, but he was the creator of famous Monsters of Filmland.
Yes.
And is a notorious horror memorabilia collector. Well, I read while doing research on this that was not actually Boris Karloff's ring that he had on. I will read this. It says this, it was long believed to have been in possession of Forrest J. Ackerman for many years, the ring. However, it was debunked in September of 2017 by a woman named Irene, who uploaded a video showing both rings in extreme close-ups. And Forrest's was a lot smaller and had discrepancies that in no way matched the Karloff original. So, incomprehensibly, a fan paid 5 figures for the Ackerman counterfeit ring. So the ring I was admiring was apparently not the original ring that Boris Karloff wore in the movie.
Are you saying that Forrest Ackerman lied to you?
I'm saying that there was probably multiples on, and he had one of them, because there's usually multiples of things like that. Of course, in a movie. Yeah.
So he probably had a long replica. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Wow. So that's a cool story. Still, though, it's we'll have to resurrect Forrest and have him tell the real story.
I know both of them are dead now, but I love telling that story because I was there with Richard Matheson and Forrest Ackerman in the same room.
In the same room.
Yeah, that's crazy.
I can sometimes touch greatness.
Yes.
So a few decades passed, and Hammer decides they're going to do a mummy movie.
Yeah, and Hammer liked to juice things up a bit in the late 50s by colorizing them, adding bodaciously beautiful women, and maybe a little sex appeal and gore.
And gore. So I wanted to ask you, as the horror aficionado, where does this fall in the realm of Hammer? Is this early Hammer, late Hammer, mid Hammer, the whole Hammer overall? Where does the Mummy fall?
I didn't get concrete dates for my research, but I'm pretty sure Curse of Frankenstein was one of the first, and it came out in like 57.
Okay.
And Horror of Dracula, I think, was 58, because we covered that last season.
Yeah.
And then this was 59. So they were kind of doing it very similarly to Universal, almost back to back.
But this was but they had established Christopher Lee by now and Peter Cushing, right?
Oh, very much so. Because Christopher Lee played Frankenstein's monster, and Cushing played Frankenstein in 57.
Right. Okay.
And then they did Van Helsing and Dracula in 58. And now they're doing John Banning and Karras in this. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, I will have to say again, I think I remembered these fonder than they are, sort of thing. But I did love, there's just something about watching Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing. There's just, as a horror fan or a sci-fi fan or any of that, you cannot not appreciate those two actors and what they did. I mean, as far as I know, except for the flashbacks, Christopher Lee doesn't speak in this, right?
No, because his tongue has been removed.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, it's cut out.
Yeah.
But he acts it so well. I mean, you see the scenes, even as stilted as he does, because I don't think he does a good mummy, really.
He looks like a concrete mummy more than a bandaged mummy.
Well, I have a weird key for this one, and it may be a key for 32 too, actually, and go through but Gollum. The mummy is a golem, essentially.
Oh, yeah. Because he's got mud from the riverbed or whatever on him. Yeah.
And this one especially, he walks and gestures, and his attacks and everything is very much like a golem or a golem, whatever, which was even done on X-Files, that sort of thing. Right. So there's that I think is a good key reference that goes all the way through the whole mummy mythology, bringing this thing back to life that really doesn't speak, but will do your bidding. That's a big change that they did in this one as opposed to the other one. You felt like in 32, the mummy was doing that for himself. Imhotep was, trying to resurrect Oxanon because he wanted, they're in love. In this one, it's a vengeance story.
It's the descendants of the caretakers.
Right.
Seeking vengeance on those who desecrated the tomb, which is exactly what the mummy's hand is about. Exact same story.
Okay. And those other descendants are now a cult in the 99 version with Brandon Fraser, and they're trying to stop them from resurrecting the mummy.
Right.
So
I haven't seen that in a while, but I do seem to remember that.
Yeah, but the same thing. Yeah. Mm-hmm. The hot guy in that is the one that's trying to, stop them. Him and his army of zealots are trying to keep them out of the temples.
Right. So, a brief scenario or synopsis of this is in the 1890s. So we go back in time a little bit.
Yeah.
A team of British archaeologists discovered the untouched tomb of Princess Ananka, but accidentally bring the mummified body of her high priest back to life. 3 years later, back in England, a follower of the same Egyptian religion unleashes the mummy to exact grisly revenge on the despoilers of her sacred past. So that's it in a nutshell. The difference in this movie is it has a better director. Terrence Fisher directed this movie.
Yeah.
And we love Terrence Fisher so much that this is the third film we've covered of his.
Yep.
We've also done The Horror of Dracula, as I mentioned earlier, and The Devil Rides Out, which was one of those rarities I had never seen back when we covered it.
Mm-hmm.
It was also written by a Hammer alumni. Jimmy Sangster wrote the script. So we had a little bit better of a narrative flow, I think, in this one than we had in the prior one from Universal.
Yeah, although I think his choices are weird in certain places.
I think they're just for scare's sake.
Well, it's just the base aesthetic, like establishing Karnak. Karnak was never anything. Karnak is a city. That's like saying I worship Detroit or the great god Berlin. It bugged me the entire movie, because if you're going to do an Egypt story, then I would rather be the great god Isis or Amun-Ra or Ramses. But Karnak's a freaking city.
Well, Ramses was a pharaoh, but Ra was a god, and Isis was a god. Yeah,
Thoth, Ra, any of the Egyptian hierarchy you could have had rather than the city. I thought that was weird. And it just bugged me all the way through. Every time he would start into his Karnak, la, la, la. I'm like, why are you praying to, Sigornsville or whatever? It was weird. I just didn't like that choice. I also I don't think there was enough with this guy, the character who was actually the vengeful priest. I call him a priest, but, the bad guy who was doing it all. The villain.
I can't remember what his name is. I'm trying to find it.
I don't know if there was enough with him and his backstory other than I have to protect the tomb kind of thing. Also, the fact that the prologue in this is not scary and took way too freaking long as opposed to the 32 version. The whole opening up the tomb and opening up the sarcophagus and finding the other scroll and opening that up.
And the set looks really cheesy.
It is, really bad set. Yeah. And it takes forever to get there. And then,
I guess I didn't really realize that. Okay.
I think Cushing is doing a strong job. I think Terrence Fisher is trying his best, but he's not supported by pacing or scenic or story or anything to help him get through this.
I'm sorry if I seem out of it, but I can't find him in my cast. I wonder if he's not listed. I have Eddie Byrne, who played Inspector Mulroney, but that's not the same guy you're talking about.
No.
And Felix
George Pastel. George Pastel is Mahomet Bey. That's the guy.
All right. The reason I didn't recognize him is because it's an older picture of him. He doesn't look as young in the picture. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, Mahomet Bey was the priest or whomever. He was the protector of the.
He wore the little Shriner cap.
It's a fez. Yeah.
Yeah.
But the Shriner cap. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what you call it. Yeah, it is a fez. You're right. A little bit of background. I did have the years. Curse of Frankenstein was 57. Horror Dracula was 58. And this film was made after Hammer reached an official agreement with Universal to make remake. So apparently, I guess they did the first two, and then they said, hey, we want to do more. So this was the first in those. I wonder how much they paid. I'm really curious about that. It said that in the agreement, it allowed them to use the name Karis. So that was passed along in the agreement.
Probably because of Mummy's Hand then? Because that's
yes,
when they used it,
actually,
right?
very funny that you should say that. If I go on to read, instead of a remake of The Mummy, the plot and most of its principal characters are taken from The Mummy's Hand and The Mummy's Tomb. The 32 movies, famous and early scene of the sight of the mummy walking across the tomb floor, driving a member of the team insane, is recreated here, but not seen in any of those 1940s movies I just mentioned. So yeah, there's a lot to do with the sequels in this one, more so than the first one. So I think they came to the same conclusion that the first one was kind of a snore. They wanted to liven things up a bit and have more mummy for your buck.
Yeah, but again, and it's a Sangster issue, I think one of the things they miss is exactly what we were talking about that makes the Universal monster so endearing is we don't get an emotional connection.
There's no sympathy
to Karis. And we should, even if it's, oh, he's being abused by this guy and forced to do these murders kind of thing, but we don't get any of that.
I mean, the only thing we get is when he sees what's her face,
Isabel,
and she looks like his long lost love. You see a little bit of it in his eyes, but his eyes are not as expressive as Karloff's.
No.
So
no, not at all.
You don't really get it, and the makeup's not as good. So
the makeup is not as good. The whole stiltedness of the way they ask him to play it is not as good.
I do like when they shoot him though, and it looks like dust is coming out of it.
Yeah, yeah, especially with shotgun blasts.
Yeah,
you know, kind of thing. I did think it was interesting that this not only had one flashback, it had two flashbacks.
Yeah, it sure did.
Did we
and
really
that one
need
was
to?
You talk about long. That parade going to the tomb.
It's going, okay, I don't need to see all that.
That was a lot. It was like a parade of parade floats. And it was like, and there was this God, and there was this God.
Yeah.
There was this God and representation of this God.
The 12 Vestal Virgins, which opened the Lake of the Dead, or whatever. It just kept going.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, that's a long parade, dude. Just put them in the ground. Let's go.
It was. Any scenes, though, that stick out to you in this?
The lovely parade. No, the scenes that I have listed are I've got under my scenes and notes, it says anytime Cushing moves that flock of hair. You can always tell when it's a Peter Cushing fight because he has that one flock that and it's always right there.
Yeah, I have forgotten about that, but yeah, you're right.
But so anytime he does that, his two scenes, the one with Isabel and the one with John Banning, or his John Banning, the other guy, the other Egyptologist guy. It's just so Peter Cushing, just the way he speaks.
Anything he's in, I love him.
He's so authoritative, but also genteel. He's a very gentleman sort of British actor.
I always thought that Christopher Lee did it for me, that he was the great of Hammer. But the more I watch these old movies, it's Peter Cushing.
It is
amazing.
It is. Peter Cushing is just so good. He's able to, and he played the age really well, I thought. The young, when he's the young kid whose leg is just injured, up until now I'm the adult who walks with a limp and everything else. Although I do have in my notes, so wait, you two grown men can't outrun a mummy carrying a girl? Really? he got a head start on you somehow?
Right.
I mean,
I don't understand. Why do you think they did the broken leg at the beginning? I never really saw that come into play as far as the plot.
No, it didn't.
I was like, well, is he just tired and didn't feel like standing up in those scenes? I don't understand why
Well, they had to have a reason why he wasn't there for opening the tomb.
Oh, so that he wasn't one of the ones that was going to be killed by Karis. Okay, gotcha.
But he is, which didn't make sense to me because he's the third one that Karis was supposed to kill.
That's true. You're
and
right.
I'm going, well, then that didn't make sense. It might make sense if that didn't
They
work.
should have just never had him have a broken leg. He should have just been there.
It should have just been there, and it would have been probably a better scene because Peter Cushing may have even said, "Can we redo these walls because this sucks?" or whatever. Anyway, but yeah, so I like those two scenes. I thought she was a total waste all the way through it. They didn't use her at all, other than eye candy.
Your hair.
Yeah. I've got that in my notes. I've got really, Isabel, your hair, like that's going to make a difference.
Yeah, he doesn't recognize you. Let your hair down.
And second, I've got Mohammed Bey says, kill her, Karis. That was a mistake. He should not have said that. That's the one thing he should not have said. That will turn your mummy against you if you say kill your lover, kind of thing.
It was funny. I was going to say, as far as scenes, the scenes that I love that are unique to this film are the swamp scenes. I think it's really cool that they decided to bring a swamp into the story.
Yes, and utilize it and use the swamp.
Yeah,
in an interior set, they built that swamp. So
and I read where Christopher Lee got all kinds of hurt in this movie. One of the reasons was he was tripping on shit in that swamp and was like hurting his ankles. And in one of the scenes when they were fighting, he hurt his back. So a lot of that stiff walking could have been real. Oh, David has froze.
You froze.
I'm back
fine.
though, so maybe they didn't disconnect us.
I've been here the whole time.
Okay. Well, I'll have to be editing this motherfucker. But what I started to say is a lot of his stiffness may have been real because of injuries that he had gotten on the set.
Yeah, that's why I was saying, give me the pain meds. I need the pain meds. I thought that I did read in production research that there was actually another guys who are drunk scene that they cut for pacing. And I went, why didn't you cut two of the other ones? Because those things go on too long too.
They do go on too long. It's like, let's have friendly, grave diggers or whatever you want to call them in a pub. I was like, no, we don't need that.
Yeah. And those just went on for days. I did like the inspector. I thought he's a great actor. He's a Hammer staple. I think I've seen him in a couple of others.
Eddie Byrne.
Yeah. And he was strong in this and a good character and a good pairing with Cushing or John Banning.
Well, he was also paired with Cushing in Star Wars. He played General Willard.
Yep.
In Star Wars. Sense. Yeah. I was thinking about Peter Cushing's little tuft of hair and how he doesn't have it in Star Wars because it's all combed back and looking really severe.
Well, yeah, because
Grand
Moff Tarkin.
Yeah. Yes. I don't know if that guy I was trying to see if he did any other Hammer movies. I didn't really check. Did we want to go ahead and move on to cast? I have a little bit, not much. I don't really have anything on Peter Cushing, just that I think he's wonderful and I love him. Okay, here's where Christopher Lee got hurt. He got hurt when he was supposed to crash through a door, and the door was bolted, and his shoulder was dislocated when he broke it down.
Ow. Okay.
Yeah. So he really broke that door now. So he had a dislocated shoulder, and he had something going on with his feet that had to do with that swamp, walking around in that swamp. And it says that, so the mummy walk isn't entirely acting. These injuries, to his back and shoulder, as well as the swamp injuries.
Right.
And the squib shoes, when Peter Cushing shoots Christopher Lee, left burn marks. And he also threw his back out carrying that woman. So Peter, this was not a good memory for Christopher Lee at all.
Yeah. Give me the Dracula parts.
Yeah. Let me walk downstairs in a cape, please. I'm tired
no more mummies for me.
Yeah. I can relate to him. I mean, especially at my age, man. I have back issues too. One of the things I was wondering if you noticed, we mentioned Eddie Byrne being in other films, but did you notice someone else in this movie that's in a movie that we've covered?
Someone else who's in a movie we've covered a lot of movies. I mean,
there's a guy named Michael Ripper. He played
Michael
Sergeant
Ripper.
in Quatermass in the Pit.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That's where I recognized it. I recognized him because he's one of the drunks, right?
He's Poacher. That's what his name known as. But yeah.
Yeah, he was the one that like kept seeing him. He would see the mummy and then he would go run hide behind a bush.
Right.
And the mummy would walk by in the Terrence Fisher shot, sort of thing. Yeah. Okay. I couldn't remember. I couldn't place where I'd seen him before.
And then, I really don't have anything. I mean, Yvonne Furno played Isabel / the Princess Ananka.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, she's kind of forgettable. A lot of this movie, I have to say this, we're moving on to keys, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't really have any other trivia. If we're moving on to keys, a lot of this movie reminded me of Star Trek. Is that not
really
weird?
I would love to know how.
The dramatic music, the female costumes, the color. I don't know. And I guess because it was almost in the same time period, it was just, 8 years before.
Yeah.
I don't know. A lot of it just reminded me of like classic Star Trek.
Interesting. I've got music note because I didn't like the music in this, but it's very Hammer music. It's a lot of those violin arpeggios and then a huge brass horn underneath it.
And melodramatic.
Kind of thing. Very melodramatic, very in your face. One of my keys is, and it's actually kind of represented by that picture behind you of the library, is Hitchcock. This has a lot of a Hitchcock feel to me. The way the interior sets are lit. Terrence, it's the time frame, but they're using obviously similar film stock as well, which plays up a lot of the color, but gives everything like a real crispness kind of to it, but not a technicolor crispness like you got with like Wizard of Oz, even in the 30s, or any of that, Lawrence of Arabia. Instead, you get this kind of synthetic color, but the reds are really red and the yellows are really yellow.
It's interesting that you mentioned the palette, because comparing these movies, they're both beautiful. One's just beautifully done in black and white, and one's just beautifully done in color. They're both, I mean, neither one detracts from the other that way speaking. I think they're both powerful in that aspect.
Well, I think very powerful for the time in which they were done. In 32, to be able to have that high contrast kind of black and white photography. And then in this, in 59, when Hammer is trying to establish itself as a not a blood and guts, but a very vibrant, bright sort of thing. I also think it's interesting. A key that I had is the credit sequences for both of these movies. The credit sequence in 32 is really cool. The way the whole miniature pyramid turns around and the title of the mummy comes out of it.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. That's really cool in 32. And in this one, it's all panning over hieroglyphs as it's coming up, but still with that dun, 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 music.
And I don't know if it was just a brain fart or a lapse in my logic, but at one point when they looked at the hieroglyphic scroll in this movie, it looked identical to the one I thought in the first one, only not in color.
I think it is. I did not research that, but I thought the exact same thought. I thought that is the scroll of Thoth. That is the scroll of Thoth, the same one as 32. And I think they took an image from the 32 and recreated it.
And just recreated the exact same one, because I thought, am I imagining this? That looks almost identical to the one in the first movie.
It looked exactly the same. As a matter of fact, I think we should look it up and, screenshot it just to compare, because I was pretty sure it was the same one.
Okay, very cool. Then I'm not losing my mind.
You are not. No, it was the same thing.
And then as far as other keys, I don't really have a lot. I mean, because they're really the same keys from the other movie as far as the sequels. And
one of my keys is the same as we have whenever we talk about Hammer, which is which is EC Comics and that whole feel, because this is a vengeance story. This is not a love story. 32 is a love story. Essentially, it is this guy who's wanting to reclaim the love that got him cursed in the first place.
Right.
This one, the love is there. He was cursed, but it's a vengeance story. He's being manipulated by this guy who is wanting him to commit murder because of sacrilege, and so it's not the same as that. And also, I think, there's that karma sort of thing. In the 32 version, they tell the little guy, do not open this vault, this small box. Don't open it. Don't do anything. Instead, when they go out to talk about the fact that one of them is actually going to leave because we shouldn't even be here. Right. We should not be desecrating this. The other guy's going to do, this is an incredible scientific find. Blah, blah, blah. While that's going on, dude not only opens it, but unrolls it and starts reading it out loud. Okay, so you kind of get what you deserve there, dude. You know what I'm saying? In the 59 version, the one guy is saying, don't do this. The priest guy is saying, don't do this at all. I mean, he shows up saying, you cannot be here. I don't care what Egyptian, licensing and royalties you paid, but you can't be here. And they're going, we're going to do it anyway. We don't care about you, blah, blah, blah. And the other guy, shouldn't we wait for John? No, John's laying in bed because his leg is broke. We're going to do it ourselves. Well, let me go talk to John. So they do open it up, but then he says, I'm going to go talk to him. And meanwhile, dude picks the thing out of the wall, opens it up, reads the scroll. Okay, you get what you deserve. I'm sorry. Yeah. Although he went crazy mad instead of getting killed by that. Well, no, they both went mad. Right? They both went mad. Yes. He ended up in an asylum because that's John's father. Right. And then the first one, we don't see him again, but he's Renfield.
We don't see him again.
He just starts laughing and crying. And
I got distracted for a second because I started thinking about the set and how much better the set was in the 32 version than it was in the Hammer version.
Yeah, and the 59 one freaked me out because in the flashback scenes, the sets look pretty cool. Mm-hmm. A couple of them, like the throne room scene, looks really good, and the condemned scene. It's the same scene when they cut his tongue out and all that. Mm-hmm. It looks pretty cool, but then why wouldn't you put that into the?
And when they cut I want to say in that scene where they cut his tongue out, they have a regular height pedestal, but like when they go into the crypt to begin with, it's like they couldn't afford to lift the thing higher. It's just there on the floor.
Yeah.
It's
like
cheap,
chest high in the flashback, but now it's suddenly on the ground.
Right. Yeah. And I don't know. I mean,
well, also in the flashback, they show them desecrating the sarcophagus. They do what supposedly happened in Egyptians, which is you cut off the beard, you scar it, you put all these marks all over it.
Oh yeah.
To show that this was a bad person sort of thing. And yet when they find the sarcophagus, none of that is there.
No.
I was going, really?
Or they don't at least take heed of it or anything. Yeah.
Plus the fact that there is no reanimation of her in this. She looks like the drawing that he has of her, but there is no. She's not like Anaxunam, is in the 32.
In both movies, the whole reincarnation plot is just glossed over.
Yeah.
You don't really, unless you're like us and we know it, you don't really, I mean, you have to be paying attention to kind of get it.
Yes.
Because they don't give you a lot as far as, oh yeah, she looks exactly like the princess. That's why he likes her.
Yeah. And my last key though is, and you knew I had to do this one, but it's Steven Spielberg's amazing story, the episode called Mummy Daddy.
Mummy Daddy, yeah.
Because he walks just like he's making fun of Christopher Lee in this, with that kind of really stilted sort of
like he's got rebar in his bandages.
Yeah.
That's hilarious.
And he has the same thing. He can't talk. He's got the bandages over just his eyes for a lot of things.
I had forgotten about that. I did mention it to you before we did this though last week. Yeah, that is.
I love that episode. Holy. Tim, it has been quite an interesting retrospect to do these two back to back.
I'm glad we did. Like I said, we needed to pay homage to these movies. Well, first of all, I love going back to the Universal, and this is a classic. And I'm glad we did it.
Well, these are two major production studios of horror films, Universal and Hammer, both of them. And we've covered them before. But to actually, like I said, I love doing it this kind of retrospect where we compare them different decades, because that's, what we do. We compare.
And I honestly, now that we've gone through a lot of the Universals, I mean, we have a few left maybe. I'm seriously looking at secondary Universals for options, like Dracula's Daughter's one that I wouldn't mind covering. As well.
And I think Hammer has one that's the Brides of Dracula or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Or the Satanic Rites of Dracula.
Hammer's Wolfman, the one with
Oliver Reed.
Oliver Reed is really good.
Curse of the Werewolf. That's on the list. I'm pretty sure that's on the list.
Okay. So. All right. So anyway, all of you out there listening and watching, that may be some that we do in the future because we try to do this every week of some form. And we want to thank you guys for listening and putting up with us and doing all that. If you would, please, like always, everyone says on all these podcasts and YouTube is subscribe, click, ring the bell. That way you'll find out when we have new episodes coming and all of that. Also, any review you give us helps us and helps us attract more people and get more numbers up. We do have a Patreon page as well, where you can actually see not only some special material that we make just for our Patreon fans, but also we have 2 additional podcasts there. One is X-Files Declassified, and the other one is the Dilithium Chamber, which is we are tracing Star Trek, the original series, going episode by episode, which we dearly love, sort of thing. And Tim, until next time, when we might be in outer space or we might be in a dungeon again. I don't know where we'll be.
We are definitely in sci-fi world, but I can't remember if it's outer space or not.
It's eventually outer space.
Okay.
So yeah. So that's a teaser for all of you guys. Come back and see us next week.
All right.
Tim, talk to you then.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
You can't start the car. Johnny has the keys.